Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this month's coffee talk. Appreciate you taking some time out of your morning to join us. My name's Sean O'Brien. I'm the president of QuickRate, but I am more pleased to introduce my two panelists, or co-panelists today. Steve, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everyone, for joining us again this morning. My name is Steve Huntington. I'm the director of analytics here at QuickRate and Quick Analytics. I've spent my entire career working solely with community financial institutions on everything from strategic planning and valuation to M&A advisory, capital planning, and model design and maintenance. And I've spent about a decade or so now here working with Sean and Jason and the team to bring that experience to bear in building the types of tools like CECLSolver.
Great, thanks, Steve. And I saw Jason had his coffee, so he's always got his coffee ready. Steve and I never do. But Jason, go ahead and introduce. Oh, look, there we go.
It's I lied. You're right. I'm living a lie. It's tea, but it's close enough.
Yeah.
It's hot.
Water coffee. Yeah.
Yeah. Good morning, Jason. Go ahead if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us again today. I've been working here at QuickRate for a while now, just mainly selling Steve's products. So I've talked with a lot of you going over these. So yeah, great to be here today. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, so most of you, right, have probably come into contact with Steve or Jason, either in getting introduced to the tool or through the coffee talk. So we're glad to have both of them here with us today. Just a reminder on our format, you can certainly use the chat and the QA function. I will just kind of monitor those and take those questions as they come in. We certainly want this to be an interactive experience for you. I think one of the things that's really, driven the success of our coffee talks is your participation. We're going to talk about a couple of enhancements that we're making to the tool, and those really have come from all of you in ways we're going to, moving forward as we move through the transition to CECL. We want to make the user experience even better than what we have it today. So we are listening, to all of your suggestions, trying to prioritize them within our IT team, and we're going to touch on a few of those today. So be patient with us. We are taking all of your comments to heart, and again, trying to put together a plan to implement as many of those as quickly as we possibly can. So to that end, I think one of the things that certainly, as all of you are getting more engaged with your CECLSolver as we get closer, we have made a number of changes, and that prompted questions about updating our user guide. And so Steve and Jason and David and our Jennifer and our marketing team, Lori, they all stepped in to do this. And so Steve, do you want to discuss that? You want me to hand you the screen?
Sure. Yeah, I'll share my screen here. Here we go.
We can see it.
All right, so this is the new updated user guide, taking into account all the enhancements and changes we've made over the last few months, as well as some other best practices that we've come across through working with all of you. This is live on our site as of, I believe, yesterday. So if you log into the CECL tool and you see the button for the updated user guide and click on it, this is what's going to come up. So again, it takes you kind of step by step through how to use the tool, whether it's the first time you're using it and you're building your first scenario, or whether it's something you're updating on a quarterly basis and just want a little refresher on how and where to best update the tool on an ongoing basis. First couple pages are simply, the overview of the tool that we've always had up there with a couple notable changes. The updated or newer tabs for held to maturity securities and individually assessed loans and whatnot are all included in here now. But the overview just reminds everybody what the basis of the tool is, that it's an automated tool. It's based upon all the call report information that we get from the Form 5300s from your credit union and all the other credit unions around the country. It's based mostly on the weighted average remaining maturity, or the WARM method, with some elements of open pool snapshot and some other methodologies as well. It starts with the WARMs. Doing those weighted average remaining maturity calculations are a critical input into the tool. whether you're getting those calculations from an ALM provider or whether you're doing them internally and then overlaying some assumptions about prepayments, or whether you're sending us your loan level data and we're taking care of the warms for you and then providing you with some prepayment starting points that you can then modify as you see fit. As little or as much assistance as you need with the warms, we certainly can be flexible and provide as they are critical input to the tool on the front end. And then just reminding everybody how the tool works, that, once you've built a scenario, the whole thing lives in the cloud. You build new scenarios, you save them, you overwrite them, you create new ones each quarter. You can export them at any point you want into an Excel environment or a PDF environment. As a best practice, we highly suggest always making as many notes as you can, documenting your process each time you run the tool, whether you're making notes on the summary tab about some loan balances that you excluded because they're government guaranteed, whether you're making notes on how you came to your qualitative factor adjustment and your narrative around those adjustments, or on the unfunded commitment side. We have multiple areas throughout the tool where you should be making as many notes as you possibly can to document the process. And as soon as you make those notes, they get saved with your scenarios. And so when you come back next quarter, next month, you can look back and see what your notes were and your thoughts were when you made those subjective decisions and adjustments the last time around. And it provides the audit trail that's necessary to make it through an exam or a meeting with your auditors. The other things that are all in here, again, just the steps on managing the tool, inputting the weighted average remaining maturity values, adjusting, adding custom segmentation if you feel that it's necessary to do so, reviewing your historical loss experience, adjusting look back periods if and when you think there's a good reason or a necessary reason to do so, looking at not just your own historical experience and trends, but taking into consideration your peer groups. Especially critically important for those of you that have a segment or two where you just don't have any recent loss experience to speak of at all. That does not mean that we're going to be able to get away with having no reserve for a big segment of our portfolio just because we haven't had losses there recently. We'll have to look outside of our four walls to the environment around us for contextual clues as to what losses might be out there, even if we haven't experienced them, and use them as a basis for adjusting our 0% historical up to some reasonable expectation of future loss, so that we get to a CECL reserve, which is going to, pass regulatory muster. This is just detailing the qualitative factor adjustment process, how we can add and subtract different Q factors, how we have certain suggested ones that come from regulatory guidance, and how to manage that process. Here's some information that we've collected about the common factors that are to be at least considered in the process of establishing an ALLL or now an ACL under CECL. The ability to add individually assessed loans and stripping those individual loans that don't have any similar risk characteristics to the rest of your pools, right? Mortgage loans that are in default and foreclosure may be imminent, and you have a high and a relatively defined loss that you might see. Those are individual loans that you're not going to want to keep with the pool. You're going to want to deal with on a one-off basis, and we do have a template for that. Same thing with the held to maturity securities, a very small piece or negligible piece of the puzzle for many of you on the call, but not negligible for some others. So we have that as well. Some guidance and discussion around the unfunded commitments, the different pieces of how you get from A to Z and coming up with some sort of estimate of potential long-term future losses on loans that don't really exist yet. It's all a little hypothetical in nature, but something that they're asking us all to at least take a stab at under CECL, and it's going to be on your call report starting next March. There'll be a new line item on there for unfunded commitment reserve where there was not on your call report historically. And then finally, just a quick one-page, guide on reminding you of the steps that you'll take on an ongoing basis once you've built a scenario that you like, how to update that scenario, pull in new financial data, tweak Q factors, and then save it as a new scenario so that you have CECL reserves that you can track over time and compare in parallel to your current ALLL And then once we're into next year and the ALLL has gone the way of the dodo, and we're all living in a CECL world, tracking how your reserve changes so that you have an idea as to obviously the income statement side of it, right? What provision you're going to need on an ongoing basis to keep your reserve adequate and appropriate. Sean?
All right, Steve. Hey, while we're here, we just got a question, and I forgive me, I forgot to mention this at the top. We will send out a link to today's recording as well as a copy of the slides, but it made me think that we should, while you've got the screen, Steve, maybe just show them where this user guide will live going forward.
Sure. Give me 1 second.
Because again, this will be resident on the CECL site, so it's right there. Yep. Thank you very much. So just clicking on that button will pull it up for you, so you'll always have access when you're in the tool. All right, that's perfect. Thanks, Steve. I'm going to take back the screen from you here. Oops.
Yep.
Jason, any comments you want to make around the user guide? I know you're kind of on the front lines with our credit unions, and anything that as you think about the revisions we made?
No, they're awesome. Yeah, no, great. We had so many changes that were coming and happening that kind of had waited to put this off a little bit. But I know kind of Steven mentioned in the notes to have those segment level generated notes. It's probably the one thing I see skipped the most is putting in those notes, and a big part of this is going to be that documentation. So I can't remember what I did last week, much less a quarter ago. So again, very key to get those notes in there, really explaining why you made that adjustment, and even no change of a Q factor is also an assumption there as well. Yep. So just keep those notes in there.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jason.
Yep.
The explanation around what adjustment you make is going to be more important than what that adjustment itself is, right? Whether you adjust it up 20 or 30 or 40 basis points, as long as you have some sort of basis in reason, to make that adjustment, they're going to be okay. They're going to be accepted. But if you don't have a reason for it, it doesn't matter what it is. It's not going to be accepted. So the documentation is really critical.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Perfect. All right, so these are just a couple of slides, again, examples from the user guide that Steve just went through. Again, you can reference this tool now up here in the box as we move forward. So again, I think a lot of what we have done to this point with these coffee talks really have been around kind of just prepping for CECL, questions around the methodology, getting familiar with the tool. Now, as we enter the home stretch here, a lot of you are diving in. It's generating questions. It's not only generating questions, but also suggestions on improving, your process, our process, making things easier for you. And so the user guide is a good example, as Jason said, right? We've got a lot of things going on. We're trying to prioritize them, but the Q factors are obviously a huge piece of the puzzle for you. And for some of you, this may be maybe a deeper dive into this process than you've been familiar with. We've gotten a lot of requests on anything you can help with. And so I think the couple of topics we're going to discuss today are some of these earlier preliminary steps where we are trying to take the next step to assist you with this. So, the first one really is a question: can we get some help determining, documenting, supporting, our Q factors? And what we've come up with is a little bit of a matrix that I'm going to have Steve walk through here real quick.
Yeah. So what we've done, and this is going to be we're going to be adding a handful of Excel-based tools that we think that you can take and you can use to help as ancillary products with the CECLSolver to help you get through the exam and audit process and help you just manage your process around CECL and around, Q factors specifically. Obviously, the historical data and the first half of CECL is all about what history would suggest that we need from a reserve standpoint, right? That's much more factual based. Now, there's a subjectivity hidden in every nook and cranny of CECL, including, there's a lot of subjectivity in what WARM calculations and assumptions to go in there, but the historical side is more factual. The second half of CECL is 100% subjective. It's all about what ways do we think things might be different in the future than they were in the past. And so we get lots of questions around, can you help us provide some sort of framework for what adjustments we're making to our historical experience for, via Q factors for our expectations going forward. So this is just sort of a suggested framework for how you might go about that in a kind of a logical way. So this is an Excel file that we're going to be adding to the tool in the next couple of weeks here, which gives you the ability to look at, to go segment by segment, because you'll have all the same thoughts and decisions to make for each segment or pool or bucket in your portfolio. So for example, for first lien, typical mortgage loans, there's lots of different subjective things you might consider in making that qualitative factor adjustment. So we allow you to come in here and think about, scoring those things, whether these things have been improving, whether they've been deteriorating, and what that might mean from a Q factor adjustment standpoint. So this is really just, there's not a lot of industry data at all in this Excel file. This just provides you a framework that you fill out, right? You take this and you run with it. You make the adjustments that you think are appropriate, making notes. So this is all about the documentation process. This is the first real good step in taking what you have in our tool and then creating a more defined documentary process around how you came up with those adjustments. Sean?
Yeah, sorry, Steve, I should have taken this one because this was one of, I was really more kind of my instrumental in this. And again, I think what I liked about this, we've used this at an institution I've worked with in the past. And what it does, as Steve said, right, it just gives you a framework. And that's why we put the adjustment range. If you look here at the top, the score between 1 and 5, right? You could make this 1 in 10 if you want. The adjustment range, you could make very smaller or large. And that's why we put the range in here. We wanted to simply provide you with a framework that if that you could kind of reference quarter to quarter, see where you were. Again, we've talked a lot about in these coffee talks, be directionally correct, right? And so it gives you a sense of where you were, where you think you are, and where you're going, and you can modify those. So what we've done with the Excel tool is we've lined these up with each of the same pools that you'll have in CECLSolver, as well as the items that are listed in the Q factors tab. So we tried to marry this up as close as you can. But again, this is for you to utilize however you'd want. If you want more than 5-point scale, if you want it to be 7 or 10 or whatever, up to you. If you want to make the range 0 to 5 basis points, 0 to 10, whatever you want. This is for you to customize. We just thought this is something that we know has worked in other institutions, this type of format. I like it because, again, I've talked a lot about, I'm just simple-minded, right? So this is just a very straightforward approach to the Q factor process that you can kind of make your own if you're looking for some ideas on how to manage that process. So as Steve mentioned, this will become a resource available to you on the tab, and then certainly something you can take as your own and start to personalize it. Jason, do you have any comments or anything you want to add? I know this is probably even new to you, seeing a little bit here. So
yeah, this is great. I know. Yeah, I've seen this type of template before. This is just quantifying changes from a previous historic period. So this is great. To kind of gives you that framework of where to go and why. So yeah, fantastic.
Good. Okay. All right. So next up, this is, again, I think as all of you are diving in, Jason's getting more inquiries and requests. He's typically bringing Steve in because you and your teams are diving in. And while we have the SOC 1 Type 1, which is really, our independent way of showing you that the way we're calculating things are, is working and we're dealing with all the data. Nevertheless, many of you want to, know how the watch is actually being built. And unfortunately, Steve, doesn't have the time to go through it for everybody. So and your auditors might be asking, and your regulator may ask in the future. And so what we're going to try to do is give you the ability to get some more information so that you can actually see how the watch is built, in our calculations. So hold on, Steve, right before you go there, let me just make sure there's nothing in the chat that Okay, thanks for everyone's comments. I appreciate that. Yeah, certainly get input from your teams, but I'm gonna turn this
And-
now, Steve, and you can kind of walk.
Yeah, and one quick note on the Q factor matrix as well. And this is in addition to being able to see some of that data as it comes in as well from different customers and how they use that. We're also going to be looking at scenario data for now that we have so many users using the tool now. We can get information and sort of aggregate it in a way that we can share with you guys on a quarterly basis what we are seeing as far as adjustments to our Q factors in general on a blind pool obviously type basis, but having a feel for all of our hundreds of users, are we seeing Q factors increase on this on consumer loans over the last quarter, or are we seeing more or less adjustments from unfunded commitment standpoint? And we're in the process of aggregating more and more of that data, and so that we can share with you guys on sort of a universal basis what some of those trends are, right? Because none of that information is publicly available stuff that you're going to get from your regulators or auditors. So I think we have are in a somewhat unique position where we have so many users now that we can get information from so many of you and share what some of these trends are that can be really helpful in that process of qualitative factor adjustments going forward. So at some point, look for some of that information from us as well. Yes. So for the historical loss calculations, I don't know if I'm the watchmaker. I feel more like blind watchmaker. That's an evolutionary theory joke. So yeah, let's walk through this one more time here. I think what the best thing for me to do is to share my screen
Let
in
me
Excel.
stop here. So, yeah.
Let me get that
Take-
up here. Give me 1 second. All right, and
All right, we're up and running.
excellent. So this is just an example of when we get on our tool, we're showing those year-end numbers, right? On our historical tab, we're showing full year balance numbers, charge-off recovery numbers, and then all the way on the right, we're showing how that leads to a lifetime historical loss rate. And the way we want to think of a lifetime historical loss rates are not there, as opposed to thinking of losses on an annual or annualized basis. Our entire industry has always thought of income statement ratios, including things like net charge-off ratios, on an annual basis or an annualized basis. If it was 1 quarter net charge-off ratio, you would take 1 quarter of net charge-offs, multiply it by 4, so it was an annualized value, and then so you can compare a net charge-off ratio from a single quarter to an entire year, right? So it was across different durations, you could compare apples to apples. But we're thinking of things differently. Under CECL, we're not thinking about annual loss rates. We're thinking about losses over the remaining lives of the asset. So multi-year aggregate loss rates, not annualized ones. And so that's our math follows from there. So if you were looking for how the actual exact math works to get to that historical lifetime loss rate, you can't get the exact number just from the values that are displayed on the interactive tool, because we're showing annual summaries. If we were to show every single quarter, there would be 50 columns on that tab, and you wouldn't be able to print it out or export it or anything else. And so this is kind of an auditing tool that we're building now that will allow you to get all the quarterly data that you need in order to get to these calculations and share it with an auditor. Right now, it's just I'm just showing you how this works, but the way it's going to be in the future is you'll have an option when you choose to export your tool. In the Excel export, you'll have a separate button you can click, which gives you a complete data dump, so to speak. So a separate Excel export that has all the quarterly data relevant, going all the way back to your call reports, in order to fully calculate the historical lifetime loss rate. But the way it's done is that we aggregate or we add up all those quarterly net charge-off ratios. So we look at charge-offs and recovery on a quarterly basis, and we calculate quarterly annualized net charge-off ratios. These are the industry standard NCO ratios you've always seen. We get a lifetime loss rate by simply adding up the annualized net charge-off ratios and quote de-annualizing it, right? We're looking for not an annualized version, but a lifetime aggregate one. So it's simply a sum of all the annualized historical ones divided by 4. So we're sort of de-annualizing it. Mathematically, that ends up exactly the same as the way you might be more familiar with thinking about it. If we looked at, let's say we have a 3-year warm, and so we're looking at 12 quarters worth of loss data and balance data. This is how we calculate our lifetime loss rate. If you were to look at the annual net charge-off ratios and average them, so I say, well, our average annual net charge-off ratio is 11 basis points, but we have a 3-year warm. So we got to take that 11 basis points and multiply it by 3 to get a lifetime aggregate loss rate. You still get to 33 basis points. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other between the way we consider it. We think this is the way you should be thinking about it because we want to think of things in lifetime of loan period durations, not annual bits and pieces going forward. But the math ends up about the same way. Now, like I said, in the future, what we're going to have in the tool is in your export choices. If you want to export all of this granular quarterly data into an Excel tab, we'll be allowing that as well. So you get all the audit support that you need. Sean?
That's great, Steve. And Steve and I will candidly say, Steve is a watchmaker. I'm a time teller, right? So I like to summarize things. And so you can probably see that's why when we first designed the tool, everything was much more summarized to that end. But I think naturally, as I mentioned, as all of you are digging in, you want to better understand the calculations. I understand that. I appreciate that. Your auditors, we've certainly discussed that with a few auditors who want to understand the calculations. So, I think Steve's done a great job so that we'll be able to give you that full file, but we'll do it through the Excel export to get it. Okay, so that's the enhancement that we're gonna make. Let me just see if we got anything more here in the chat. All right. Next up, so Steve, this is really kind of just what you went through on your screen. So these are in the slide deck that we will be sharing with you. Next up is, again, this is a kind of a dive in user question that's kind of happened is around the warm calculations. Again, for many of you, we're calculating the warms, but for some of you who are calculating your own, this was really kind of the foundational piece to get our tool going. We took a very conservative approach with this as we introduced the tool, because again, at the heart of CECL was a more conservative approach to aggregating net charge-offs and reserving for those. However, certainly as many of you are trying to minimize what that number is, we've had questions on how we're calculating the warm. And so now we are going to provide some flexibility with this tool as well. Steve, take it away.
Yeah. So, our first version of the Excel-based warm estimator tool was just a resource for our users if they were stuck calculating their own warms and weren't getting any assistance from their ALM providers. Then we wanted to give a framework for how, in a very conservative way, they might go about calculating the warms as an input for CECL. What I guess we didn't anticipate was how little the core processors and ALM providers were going to be. We thought they would kind of be jumping on this and offering this to credit unions all over the country if they hadn't already been doing it as a result of everyone needing it to comply with CECL. And so we felt like we needed to step in and get a little bit more active in helping you and guiding you all from that standpoint, as opposed to just making it an input on the tool and leaving you all the wolves. We built that Excel estimator tool, and then we started working with a lot of you credit unions, probably many of you on the call, to say, hey, listen, if you don't have the time or the resources to be cutting and pasting all this loan level data into our Excel template, if you're using our Excel template, we'll do it for you. We'll clean it up for you, and we'll handle a larger portion of the warm calculation duties. Now, since that's all happened, we've continued, poking and prodding at the MCUA and FASB for more guidance on appropriate assumptions for warm calculations. As you guys know from the last couple of coffee talks, We finally gotten some better guidance on things like prepayment assumptions, which can be all over the map and have a huge impact on warm calculations and CECL reserves for obvious reasons. But we hadn't got a lot of guidance or enlightenment on some more, I don't want to call them complex, but some more granular details about warm calculations, such as amortization, right? And so we started with saying, listen, we're not going to take into account detailed amortization loan level schedules for doing portfolio-based warm calculations for lots of reasons. A lot of times the data is not there. And a lot of times we want to be more conservative here. But we got some more feedback, some more guidance from the NCUA, and we worked with them to come up with sort of a way to take into account amortization in a more active way without needing a lot more data from you guys, so that we can adjust that, get those warms down to an even lower level by taking into account amortization schedules. And so that's what we've done here. What we're gonna be adding to the tool in the next couple of weeks, so very soon here, is another version or a second version of our warm estimator tool, the Excel-based tool, which allows you to take into account amortization schedules in a couple different ways. And what that does is it will end up giving you lower, shorter warms in all cases, which will, in most cases, lead to a somewhat lower CECL reserve level. So it's certainly important to take a look at this. If you want to stay and remain conservative in your estimates and your reserving, you do not have to use any of this. It is not something that is required at all. But for those of you who are looking for ways to get those reserve levels down a little bit and justify doing so, this should be really helpful. If you want to go to the next slide.
Yep.
I don't think we need to do it in Excel. We can do it right here because
Yeah.
I pasted it. So this is, if you are familiar with our Excel-based warm estimator tool, that's what the top left is. That's the existing one, right? All we're looking at is balanced data and maturity data and organizing it by a loan segment, doing an unadjusted warm calculation, and then modifying that to take into effect some sort of prepayment estimate, right? And then that brings the warm down after we take into account expected prepayments. Now we'll be able to take into account an amortization schedule as well. There's two different ways this can be done. They both lead to pretty much an equivalent result. On the top right is a more advanced method where we take each of the loans that we have in the pasted into the warm estimator tool, and we provide a basic straight line amortization schedule, right? We look at the loan's current balance. We know its maturity date. We can guesstimate what that, straight line amortization from here until maturity would look like. And so we have the loans amortized on their way down, each individual loan. And you can go in there if you want to and make assumptions about whether this loan is amortizing or whether it's balloon or whether it's interest only or whatnot, and get more granular if you want to. I'm not suggesting you go through every individual loan and make an individual decision. You could if you want to. I don't think you get a lot of juice for the squeeze in doing so. But this shows you how that would be done. And then it also allows you to overlay the same prepayment estimate that we had before into this amortization schedule. So you get what you in effect get is a warm that is not only prepayment adjusted, but also amortization adjusted. So bringing the warms down even further. On the bottom left is a more simplified methodology of doing the same exact thing that I just described. If you don't want to worry about the loan level stuff, if you're going to say, listen, I'm just going to assume straight line amortization for all the loans across the board, right? You can do it without having to go loan by loan. And it's done on the bottom left here. So we see the current balance, we see the amortization, the prepayment schedule. It's all zeros because I plugged in 0 prepayments for this example. And then you see amortization. So what you see is you follow total pay downs, right? As we go through the remaining life of the portfolio. And then we calculate the warm based upon that adjusted basis. So you notice that 3.77 is the same no matter which way you go about it, because you're getting to an equivalent calculation. So you don't need to add this piece in if you don't want to. If you're comfortable with your warms, if you're comfortable with the length of them, if you've gotten positive feedback, if you want to stay conservative, you don't have to do this. If you want to get more aggressive or less conservative, if you need to bring those warms down in an appropriate manner, you can start using this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. This is fantastic. So a couple of things. I think it's important to note when we first designed the tool, as we've kind of emphasized here today, we designed it to be the most conservative. Some of you in some credit unions want to have a higher reserve. Some of you want to have the least amount of reserve possible. So none of this has to be accomplished on day one, but I think the idea is over the next year, the NCUA, when they come in, they're going to be that first, trip in, they're going to be more interested in the transition to CECL, and that you've got a tool and you're working towards it. These are the types of things, again, that you can implement now, but you can also begin to fine tune as we move forward into next year. And so, I think we're trying to be sensitive to, making tweaks and improvements to this to customize it to your needs. But at the same time, I don't want you to feel like you have to do all these things tomorrow to have the tool still work for you. So I just wanted to say that caveat. We're excited about these new enhancements. We're excited about the feedback we're getting. We're excited about the, that you're all digging in on this, but just be careful. Everything doesn't have to be done in the next day. Jason, you're familiar.
Yeah. This kind of segues into that question I asked there is, hey, has anyone had a recent exam? I talked to a couple of credit unions that just recently did have exams, and they said their examiners still had yet to be even trained up on CECL. So it was just, have you started? Yes, great. Next question. And then that was the extent of it. So yeah, absolutely right. Don't necessarily need to get quite in the weeds now. The next year or two is just going to be a transition period to see what works and what doesn't. But as a kind of I'm not as number proficient here. Steve, would you have certain segments as one way, or could you mix this up, or would you recommend maybe sticking to one method for calculating your WARM on all your loans?
No, I think it can be very segment specific, right? It's based upon the loan characteristics that are typical in each segment that you have. If you've got, if you have a segment of your portfolio that tends to have lots of balloons and doesn't have typical amortization schedules, you can treat it very differently than a segment that has a lot more. Now, if you want to take into account the amortization, but let's say half of that segment, amortizes and the other half of the segment doesn't, more balloons, you can look at the unamortized adjusted WARM and the amortized adjusted WARM and average the two, right? Pick something in the middle that you think is appropriate. Say, listen, if I don't take into account amortization, I get 5 years. If I take it into account, I get 3 years. Half of them amortized, I'm going to go with 4 years. You've got the math, you've got the data, the backup, you have the narrative and justification to go with a 4-year WARM.
Yeah, perfect.
That's fantastic. But I think it's a great question, Jason. I agree. I think customize it to the way you're some of those pools may feel needs a deeper dive. Other ones, the portfolio approach is probably sufficient. So thank you for all of you who are continuing to chat here.
I want to jump on Anthony's real quick.
Yeah.
Well, he shared that with everyone. Thank you, Anthony. So with the WARM estimator option with amortization, do we still use the same loss rates estimated from call reports? Yes, there's no difference in anything downstream in the tool for this. This is simply applying the same loss rates to a different remaining duration of portfolio. This is now you saying that, well, once I take into account, more detailed amortization information, I really think that this segment is going to have an average remaining life, a shorter average remaining life. So you're looking at the same loss rates. You're not expecting them for quite as long of a period going forward because it has a shorter duration once you take that into account. But no math changes downstream from the WARM input by taking this into account.
Yeah, that's great. Mary, thanks for the comment on the exam that you just finished it and weren't even asked, so that's good. Just a comment there on calculating the Visa or the credit card WARMs. Anything, Steve, you want to add there?
So the credit card WARMs, in the existing WARM estimator tool, we show you a different methodology for, not a different methodology, but obviously you can't use this for exactly this way for credit card loans. They don't have a stated contractual maturity date, right? So we have to look at payment information in order to estimate. What we're trying to do is figure out how long till this loan no longer exists. Now, with a revolving line of credit, you might say, well, never. It'll keep revolving. People will keep adding balances, but we can't assume future draws. We have to look at the current balance and say, hey, if this person's got a $10,000 balance on their credit card portfolio, on their credit card loan, if they keep making similar payments in the future as they have in the past, when will it be zero? How long to zero balance, right? And if they're making $100 principal payment a month, that's 100 months. That's it's going to take them 8 years to pay it off. And so you kind of find time to zero balance using similar payments as we've seen in the past as your proxy for a contractual maturity date for credit card loans. There are some little things, fun caveats to that when you actually get into the nitty gritty. And if you want to look at that, you can give Jason a call or David Suri, and we're happy to look into it in some more detail. But that's the difference between lines of credit and typical loans, is that we have to look at payment history instead of just maturity date, contractual maturity date.
Yeah, and I would say too, download the worm estimator tool on the CECLSolver. There's a tab for it there. It has the entry fields to plug those numbers in. So exactly how to do it.
And we're not replacing the existing worm estimator tool with this. There will be another line item button right below the current one with this one. I wouldn't call this enhanced. It's just a different, more granular way of looking at some of the data. And so the way I would handle it, I would use this one you're seeing here, which will be available in the next few days. And I would look at all these worms. I would look at the unadjusted one. I would look at the prepayment adjusted one, and I would look at the amortization adjusted one. I'd consider all three of those lengths of time, and then consider where I think what makes the most sense for this segment for my portfolio. But you have more data now to justify where you think makes sense for you to be from a worm perspective. So yes, worm just got a little bit more even subjective, but everything in CECL has some subjectivity into it. So we wanted to provide more options for you.
Yeah, and so a couple points, Steve. Maybe you can get ready. I'll give the screen to you in a second. You can show them where these will be found on the resources tab if they don't know. But while you're doing that, I think it's a good point to, again, kind of take a step back, take a deep breath, right? Why did we do some of the things we did when we designed our tool? One, we had to make assumptions in building a tool. One assumption we made was that data availability would not be the same across the board for every credit union. We tried to find the common denominator and make things catch everybody. Now, as we're starting to get into it, our expectation as a company is we're going to get more granular as we go. Some of you may never need that level of granularity. Others may want it. We're going to work towards that. That's what our IntelliCredit division is doing. We're going to build enhancements within Quick Analytics to do that. Not everybody needs to do that, but we are trying to build that flexibility in should you want it to do it. But I think most importantly, always kind of take a level set with your own data and just kind of determine where you are. Steve, do you want to take the screen real quick and just show everybody where these will be found? These resources.
Yeah, and you can answer that. We can both. How do we think that they'll react when we're switching? Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, no, I think they'll. You're writing your own script here, right? And so part of this is what's your philosophy with it, right? I don't think a regulator's or an auditor's ever going to be more upset with more data, right? And that's what this is doing. Our approach first was to be more conservative. And so if you want to be more aggressive, that's what this is allowing you to do. Having more data allows you to be more refined and potentially precise. It doesn't necessarily make it more accurate all the time, but it does give you the ability to potentially support why you did it. So I don't think they'll have any problems with it at all because you're simply saying, hey, I have this data available. This allows me to dig a little bit deeper. So I don't think there'll be any issues with it at all.
Yeah, I don't either. I think, for those of you who want to go to this more amortization adjusted, which is going to bring down those worms, when you show that to an examiner or an auditor and they say, well, it's bringing down why are you bringing your CECL reserves down so much? And the answer is, we started with a conservative approach. Everyone thought that it was prudent to start with a conservative approach. The more we've thought about it, the more we've gotten into it, we realize that some of these reserve levels might be higher than we really think for the likely remaining life of the portfolio now, and that's based upon some better and more detailed guidance that we've gotten directly from the NCUA. And as we pointed out, I think as I showed at the last coffee talk, we've gotten some guidance, a little bit of guidance now from the NCUA on prepayment levels and some industry level warms. And the industry level, and they didn't give all the details behind this. It's sort of some sort of blind pool that the NCUA was using. So you're not going to be able to see how they made the sausage. We'll show you how we make our sausage. The NCUA ain't going to show you how they made theirs, but the NCUA did provide some guidance on warm calculations like a little more than a month ago, I think, month and a half ago. And we talked a little bit about that last month, but that included some suggestions of the warms that they were using were going to be more heavily adjusted for amortization than they had discussed in the past. So there really is some relatively new updated guidance from the NCUA that we did not see a year or 2 years ago that provides us some more comfort level in being a little bit more aggressive on our warms. I think that's the explanation, right?
Yeah, and I think the next question, will you need to add the prepayment speed together with the amortization results? Again, you can, right?
Yeah.
You can.
Yeah.
But I think it's important, like I always, again, I'm kind of simple-minded. What are we trying to do? We're trying to estimate reserves, right? Some credit unions want to have a higher level of reserve. Some want to have a lower level of reserves. Neither one of those is an incorrect position. It's what you want your credit union to be, whatever your culture is. Having data to support decisions you make always helps you. The bar we could not see into with all of you was what's your data, level of data availability, right? And so that's kind of how we had to, kind of construct our tool to address it. But now as we move forward and we kind of get the ground floor built, now we can start adding on to it. And that's really, really the kind of the approach we're trying to take here. So Steve, do you want to just show real quick where these can be found?
Yeah, I think I am right now. This is the summary page of the CECL tool, and at the bottom we have our existing warm estimator tool. You click on that, it downloads the Excel file. Right below this, we'll have the one I just shared. The other option, the amortization adjusted option tool will be right here below it. So if you're currently using this one and you like it and it's getting you to a reserve level that you're comfortable with and you can justify, then you don't need to do anything different or more than you're doing now. If you're looking to get those numbers down, or you've had discussions with your auditors and examiners and they want to see amortization be taken into account more so, knowing that that'll lead to a lower reserve level, because again, as Jason mentioned, a lot of the examiners we see and we talk to, they're not necessarily really highly educated on CECL yet either. So they maybe look at this and say, well, you haven't taken into account amortization. And then you do, and then it shows a lower reserve and they don't like that. So keep all that in mind.
And Steve, just is also in the blue button. That's what the other thing I wanted to show is up in the resource
blue button. Oh, for the user guide?
Yeah, the resources tab to the right.
Yeah. Sorry.
It'll be here as well.
Yep. Certainly.
So the follow-up question, won't that be double counting if you're taking into account prepayment speeds with amortization? So not necessarily, right? Because again, we're just talking about normal scheduled amortizations that a loan would have. In our initial tool, we did not factor that in. This one, you'll factor in those scheduled amortizations, but then you still could have prepayment assumptions beyond that. So
yes. So think about it as total pay down adjusted as opposed to just prepayment adjusted. This is now total expected pay down adjusted. I don't know if that helps. Maybe it doesn't.
All right. Steve, I'm going to take back the screen. If you'll stop for a second, I will take back and we'll kind of keep moving on here.
Sure.
Jason, anything you want to add final on that assumption of the prepayment calculator before we move on?
No.
Okay.
That's good.
All right. Good. So again, we've got more tools coming. I think one of the requests we've gotten as well is to be able to upload information into our tool for a final export. So that is on our coming soon. Steve, anything you want to talk about there? And just
I mean, two great things that one might consider having attached to a scenario would be the warm calculator, right? The warm estimator tool, whether you're doing it yourself or whether you're having us do it, being able to take that file and upload it and attach it to a scenario on our tool so that you have access to it in the cloud along with the rest of your CECL calculations is a request we've had out there for a while. And now that new Q factor matrix, if that's something you decide to utilize, or any other information that you deem, helpful and want to organize with this CECL process, you'll be able to open up a scenario and click on a files box and then see and upload any local files you want to, and they'll get saved securely in the cloud and be attached to either general files for your institution that apply to any scenario, right? Or a specific files that are specific to an individual scenario, like your warm calculation each quarter or whatever it is. So yeah, you'll have that hopefully in the next by the year end here, you'll be able to manage and store and upload Microsoft Office type file and any file type directly into the CECL tool and keep them warehoused there.
Yeah, and again, I think we get a lot of requests, as Steve mentioned, and Jason hears firsthand, about any narrative or anything you might be doing internally in support of your Q factors, et cetera. Now you'll be able to include that as part of the final output.
Yep.
Okay, so we've kind of talked about these warm values and prepayment assumptions. Steve, I don't know if anything else you want to add here today.
No, this is what we talked about last month. We really put this in there, but I didn't. For those of you who weren't here last month and aren't aware of it, I think it was some important information. And this is what I was just referring to, right? The NCUA came out pretty recently and started doing some blind pool study with information that they've got in order to do some industry level warm calculations for that tool that they were trying to build. And so they provided some of it on their website. We talked to them about this and we have an understanding of how they came about it. So we thought it would be good information to provide. So these are some, if you are having difficulty calculating your warms, or you want a sanity check or a double check on if those warms seem somewhat reasonable compared to some sort of industry standard, this is a place that you can go. This is a table resource that you can use in order to have a comparison. Or if you just haven't had the chance to do the warm, if you're a brand new user and you haven't done your warms yet and you're just planning on doing it at some point, stick these warms in as a starting point just to see what it looks like with some of the NCUA's data. And they have some prepayment speed stuff here too. I don't love just using this blindly because, as you know, you'd all probably figured out by now, I'm a data geek around here. And so if I don't know exactly what's going into all these things, I don't love just passing it along, because then it becomes important to me that I know everything going into that, but it's coming directly from the NCUA. And so it has to be a resource and a good piece of guidance. So take these into account, use them as some default values before you get more detail with our stuff. If nothing else, you can use some of these prepayment speeds. We gave you some earlier guidance on prepayment speeds in the 15 to 20% kind of range for most segments based upon the federal FHFA's prepayment study that we provide, as well as some stuff from the Federal Reserve where they did some prepayment studies a while back as well. This probably should supersede that for the most part, I think, because it's coming directly from the NCUA and it's organized by your call report bucket. So that is helpful from that standpoint. John.
Jason, anything you want to add here?
No, I mean, I think the biggest thing here, the takeaway, is that prepayment speeds. I know for most folks who do calculate their own warms, the prepayment speed is what is the most difficult thing to calculate on their own. So if you're going to use something or something to take away from here, it's definitely that prepayment speed. But are these new? When is the last time you downloaded this, Steve?
This is something that they're going to, I believe they said that they were going to update on a quarterly basis.
I mean, that 8% prepayment there in mortgages seems, I mean, I know in the current,
well, it is, well, it's
pretty low, but.
Well, that's the problem, because, that's one of many concerns, I would say, that I have, because I don't know what, in doing a CECL reserve calculation, the assumptions we need to be making are assumptions that should be for the remaining life of the loans going forward, right? So even if you did a perfect historical prepayment study, they're not asking you for historical prepayments. For calculating your reserve in the future, you need to be estimating what you think prepayments will be going forward over the next 5 years. If you look at a long-term trend of mortgage prepayments, it has been 2 years ago, it was insanely high, 35% annual prepayments average across the country. Now it's insanely historically low 18 months later because, well, for obvious reasons, we all know why prepayments are low. Everyone, got a new mortgage in the last 3 years, and people aren't getting mortgages right now very much. So prepayments are historically low. So it varies wildly. Now, is it going to be as low as 8% over the next 5 years? I certainly hope not. Is it going to get back to 35% in the next 5 years? I highly doubt it. So when I look at a long-term trend of prepayments in mortgages that hovers on an average around in the 15 to 20% range, I think that's a more reasonable value to use than picking one point in time when it's historically low or one point in time when it's historically high. The NCUA is obviously basing this, although I can't see the sausage, how it's being made, on what it is right now today, which is probably underestimating. We're definitely underestimating it, but it's there.
And again, I think, again, that's why you can get down some rabbit holes, right? So let's just take a measured approach and support what you're doing. So again,
Go to the next slide. You'll see why I think that 8% is, so this is the FHA's report. I have some information on this. This is also in our resources. If you click on resources on the CECL tool, this is what that's looked like. So, it was around 10% for a few years, and then it started getting closer to 20. And then for a couple of years, it was 35%, and then started declining and is now, again, I don't know where, well, okay. The NCUA did their entire study based upon a universe of only credit unions, only under 100 million in assets. This is all Fannie and Freddie mortgages in the entire country on average. So what's your peer group, right? But you can see it's definitely gone down closer to the 10 to 15% range, even current, but long-term. But what do you expect for 2027? Good question. Open to interpretation. I look at long-term averages when I'm trying to project long-term future, but that's me.
Between 10 and 15 is going to be good.
Yeah.
All right. Again, this is just another follow-up to some of the information Steve's provided in the past. Again, we've got a couple of chats in here. We will be sending a link to today's recording as well as a copy of the slide deck. I know we're up on approaching an hour, so if there's any final questions, please submit those now while we're waiting. We will have Paul Allen join us from Saltmarsh again for our December coffee talk. We will have a demo of the product on December 8th. So for any of you who are still just kind of getting started, we'll take you through the tool. Certainly in the interim, you can reach out to us at info@quickrate.com. You can certainly reach out to Jason and David Surrey, and they will address any issues and then involve Steve if necessary. So Jason and Steve, any final comments before we let everybody get back to their day?
Go ahead, Jason.
I'm gonna ask one thing. Do you have an example of bonds that would be you would need to reserve on for held to maturity securities? Kind of a question I get a lot lately is, hey, I have got a small portfolio. It has CDs and treasuries. Do I need to reserve anything? What types of investments would they need to reserve for?
Yeah, so typically what the guidance is really focusing in on is, again, not interest rate risk, which we've all seen our portfolios suffer from this year, but really anything if you held to maturity that there was actually some genuine credit risk. This typically takes the shape of like a corporate bond, right? Or maybe a non-agency mortgage back, or perhaps a piece of subordinated debt. So it's something that, again, if you held to maturity, there is a risk of not receiving your principal back. For most credit unions, right, you're buying CDs, you're buying treasuries, you're buying agencies. All of those contain a principal guarantee on it. So CECL is only focused on those pieces or securities that would not have those types of guarantees attached. Steve, anything you want to add there?
Nope, that's exactly what I would say. It's just for its current expected credit loss. So it's only focused on credit loss and credit risk, not interest rate at all. So any of those one CDs that are guaranteed for principal are completely excluded from the CECL calculation.
Anthony, your question about talking about the technical accounting aspects of CECL next time like journal entries. That is in fact what we hope to do with Paul. Paul is a CPA with Saltmarsh. We felt like that was probably an area of expertise he would be better to opine on than Steve, Jason, or myself. So yeah, that's why we're inviting him back, because we think that topic is timely as we approach the end of the year. So just let me see here. I got another question come in. So we already looked at the chats.
Yeah, the warm that the NCUA shows in their calculation is the number of months. Yeah, so just divide that by 12 to get years.
Yeah.
So 40, 40 is 3.5 years, right? Plus or minus.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you all for your participation. Just make sure that's just somebody. Yep. Okay. I hope everyone has a great weekend. I hope everyone has a great Thanksgiving. They keep popping up. I know Jason's taking care of the chats today, which is great, so I don't have to monitor. But thank you all very much. Have a great weekend, and hopefully we'll talk to you again next month. See ya.
Thank you, everybody. Talk
Thanks,
soon.
everybody.